Celebrating 42 seasons on the air, Farmweek is a production of Mississippi State University Extension. Today on Farmweek, in a follow-up, small refineries say they want the EPA to protect them from the USDA. Plus, New Orleans dodges a bullet, but water's still a formidable foe in much of the country. In Southern Gardening, elegance is the name of the game. And in our feature, the best laid plans don't always pan out. The conclusion of our 4-part series, Back to the Farm. Farmweek starts right now. Hello everybody, I'm Mike Russell. Thanks for joining us today on Farm Week. The ethanol fight continues. In yet another letter, a group of small refineries asked the EPA to protect the information in their petitions for RFS waivers from the USDA. They believe the agency is working against them, protecting the interests of corn growers. As we told you last week, many are pushing the EPA to prohibit the influence of Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue. The USDA is still fighting another battle to move its researchers to Kansas City to save money and get them closer to farmers, it says. Many of those researchers have unionized to avoid the move from D.C. and made a list of demands. The agency said no to those demands. Insiders say hundreds of employees will quit rather than face relocation. A chronic labor shortage on farms still an issue, though maybe not for much longer. A plan to reshape the H-2A guest worker program could boost wages and working conditions for migrant workers and make it possible to work year-round. At the same time, the proposal would give ag employers some flexibility. Lawmakers support the proposal and agree that changes are needed soon. While African swine fever continues to be of concern around the globe, the USDA has unveiled a new swine slaughter inspection system. The National Pork Producers Council says the new program would increase efficiency and capacity. It says the system would also boost the effectiveness of the federal inspection process. The NPPC is pushing the USDA to finalize the system soon. And finally, in the newswire, ag departments across the nation are urging the FDA to get a move on when it comes to regulating hemp. The CBD industry is already booming in the U.S., but producers are looking for what they call a well-defined regulatory framework to protect future growth. It says a lack of consistent definitions and policies is confusing the public. Gulf states dodged a bullet with Hurricane Barry, though flooding continues to be a threat. Mississippi River barge traffic had finally resumed from St. Louis north. Meanwhile, the lower river, which certainly didn't need more water, braced for another chapter in the wild weather story of 2019.
Louisiana residents have already been dealing with flooding for much of 2019 because of high amounts of water coming downstream from the severely bloated Mississippi River. The region is now dealing with flooding that comes with local weather systems. An early week storm swamped several streets in New Orleans. Cars and trucks tried to navigate the high water pooling in city streets and neighborhoods.
Yeah, man, it's no good. I stalled out too.
Isolated storms in Nebraska caused much of the same scene as cars stalled in the streets of Kearney. The National Weather Service reports nearly 9 inches of rain fell in south-central Nebraska. Most of the Cornhusker state received an inch of rain this week. A federal report issued this week indicates more flooding is likely in the nation's future. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicts 40 places in the U.S. will experience higher rates of what's called sunny day or tidal flooding this year because of rising sea levels and an abnormal El Nino weather system. Government scientists predict annual flood records will be broken again next year as sea levels rise. The Drought Monitor, based at the University of Nebraska, reveals a mostly quiet picture. Portions of Washington, North Dakota, and the Deep South are driest in the United States. In the Corn Belt, sections of Iowa to northern Indiana, meteorologists note dry pockets are beginning to form here. However, with long-term precipitation surpluses, no drought designation was given at this time. And in Alaska, record-breaking heat finally retreated. A temperature of 90 degrees had never been recorded in Anchorage. Since the mark was set on July 4th, average highs have returned to the nation's northernmost state.
On the lighter side, looking for a little luster in your landscape, horticulturist Gary Bachman says zinnias are just the thing. Flowers with large blooms and long stems, perfect for vases. Here's Gary with this week's Southern Gardening.
Let's face it, I really like the way zinnias grow in our hot Mississippi summers. A favorite of mine are the Zinnia elegans with their long stems and large and colorful flowers. Southern Gardening is back at the South Mississippi Branch Station in Poplarville, and I'm pretty amazed at the gorgeous zinnias. Queen Lime Zinnia is an attractive pale green infused with warm lilac. This flower has a subtle elegance and, in my opinion, resembles a watercolor painting. The flowers are 3 to 4 inches in diameter, and these blooms serve well as a foundation in cut flower arrangements. A nice companion to Queen Lime is Queen Lime Blush Zinnia. The large, up to 3-inch, dahlia-shaped flowers display an incredible lime green to red ombre shading with red centers. Queen Red Lime produces maroonish red tinged flowers that are crowned with lime green. This plant has gorgeous, thickly layered double flowers that are uniformly colored and create a flowery flurry. The flowers are up to 3 inches across on stems up to 40 inches tall. Another zinnia to consider is the 2006 All-America Selections Zowie Yellow Flame. The flowers of this selection are a fiery bicolor and change color as the flower opens. The multiple layers of petals open to reveal a scarlet rose center tipped with yellow stamens and all the petals edged in bright yellow. You can't go wrong with any of these zinnias in your garden or vase. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman, and I'll see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll do markets a bit differently this time. On the off chance you didn't already know, this week marks the 50th anniversary of man's first footsteps on the moon. July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed the lunar module, and Armstrong stepped out to be the first human on the lunar surface. 50 years is a long time. We thought it might be interesting to share with you a few of the differences in agriculture between then and now. First, a little background. The U.S. population was a third less in 1969 than it is now, and there are more than twice the number of people on the planet. Life expectancy is longer now, hopefully because of all that good farmer food. GDP is quite a bit more, 21 trillion versus 1 trillion. Gas was a lot cheaper, 35 cents a gallon versus 2.83 on average. Milk was $1.10 a gallon in '69, $3.27 now, though figuring in inflation actually would make it $7.53 a gallon. Price is too low. That's why many dairy farmers have gone out of business these days. Eggs were 62 cents a dozen and bread was 23 cents a loaf. There were more farms when we landed on the moon, 2.7 million then versus 2 million now. The high point was 6.8 million farms in 1935. By the way, number of acres devoted to farms back then, 1 billion, a little less now thanks to better yields. The value of farmland 50 years ago was $206 billion. It's more than 10 times that now. Per acre then, the value was under $200 in 1969. It's about $3,000 in 2019. Back when we landed on the moon, you could buy a dairy cow for under $300. Now it's roughly $1,300. Farmers made up about 8% of the American population in '69. That number is under 1% now. Yields and technology have changed all that. The president was Richard Nixon in 1969. He was very proud of the space program. Donald Trump was 23 when Armstrong declared that giant leap. Trump may take us back to the moon sometime in the next few years. And finally, Clifford Hardin was the Ag Secretary back in '69. He got all his degrees from Purdue University. Ironically, Sonny Perdue is the secretary now. He was just 22 when we landed on the moon. A couple of years later, he got his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from the University of Georgia, then went into the Air Force. He got into politics in 1991. Since we're on this subject, let's do a Moonshot Trivia question. I already told you the first two men on the moon who they were, but the third man in that crew stayed in the command module and orbited the moon while Neil and Buzz walked around Tranquility Base. Today's question, who was the third member of the Apollo crew? Was it A, Alan Shepard, B, Michael Collins, C, Deke Slayton, or D, Jim Lovell? We'll have the answer coming up. We'll take a break right here, but don't go away. Coming up in our Farm Week feature, part 4 of our series, Back to the Farm. A story of one family's journey from the city to the farm instead of the other way around. But after a year with cities growing and rural America shrinking, it feels like an exodus, with small towns able to attract fewer people and customers. Everyone seems to be doing more with less. How's the family holding up? That's coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
ATVs are a ton of fun for people of all ages, but these powerful machines can also be a ton of trouble if safety guidelines aren't followed. Always wear a regulation helmet, gloves, and goggles when operating a four-wheeler. Long sleeves, pants, and over-the-ankle boots are also smart protection. Mississippi law requires approved ATV safety training for all operators who don't have a driver's license. This message brought to you by MSU Extension 4-H.
Before we get back to the market report, let's take a look at the Farm Week calendar. Just one item, but again, it's a biggie, the Thad Cochran Agricultural Leadership Program. The application deadline is July 31st. This is an amazing opportunity for selected early career producers and allied ag professionals. A 2-year program that includes 9 multi-day seminars, about 35 days of intensive instruction on economic literacy, community decision-making, and legislative policy-making over those 35 days. There will also be an international trip. Again, the application deadline is July 31st, and candidate interviews will start in early August. If you'd like to know more about this extraordinary program, call Dr. Michael Newman at 662-325-2960. Or on the web, visit extension.msstate.edu/TCALP. The Thad Cochran Agricultural Leadership Program. No question, it's been a wildly unpredictable year in the world of agriculture. Corn has taken a huge hit this growing season, or has it? We asked analyst Tom Fitzenmeyer what he thinks is likely to happen.
I don't know what to expect, because we have no idea really what the acreage is. They're going to do this resurvey of 14 states, and that number isn't going to come out till August. Yield, we have no idea. I mean, a bunch of the corn, 40% of the corn was planted after June 1st, so there's got to be some yield implications to that. They did already lower the yield 10 bushel per acre approximately, so to some extent that's been taken into account, but we don't know if that's enough yet. We're looking at a couple weeks here, maybe hot and dry weather, which the first 2 or 3 days, that's probably good for the crop. After that, it could be a problem. So there's just so much unknown on the supply side. You know, if you take the bullish scenario where acreage is a lot lower, yield drops, then we're well underpriced probably on December corn. If on the other hand, you know, it's kind of, there was some loss, but not too bad, and we have a decent fall and an okay summer, maybe 450 to 475 is good enough for December corn. The tricky part about corn, in my mind, is that assume we get down to a 1.1 to 1.2 billion bushel carryout. The USDA was at 2 billion, so we lose 800 to 900 million bushel of corn. That's a big drop, but it's also not running out. And South America is going to have corn that competes with us right into the fall, probably, because the Brazilian crop is about being harvested, so they're going to compete with us. And then you get into what are they going to produce next winter? And then add to that, the way the price differentials are, we could see huge corn acreage in the U.S. next summer.
So that's what could happen next year. But this year in Mississippi, where producers in the heavily flooded Delta are likely to get the highest rates of trade aid, I asked analyst Josh Maples what he thinks the big picture is. Josh, the latest acreage report creates about as many questions as it answers. With all the weather that's been going on in the country, and certainly right here in Mississippi, what's the acreage looking like in 2019 for corn and soybeans?
You're exactly right, Mike. I mean, this report gives us estimates about what acreage is going to be, but it was collected back in early June. So we look at the numbers, but at the same time, we know that a lot's happened since then. So looking here in Mississippi specifically, looking at corn acreage, about 590,000 acres. This would be up significantly, about 100,000 acres over 2018 numbers. But if we look back to what we thought we were going to plant back in March, we're really not that far off of that number. So that makes us think a little bit that maybe, this acreage report could be a little overestimated, and so we'll have to watch that on corn. Soybeans, just below 2 million acres. This will be down about 300,000 acres from last year. But again, both of those have been impacted by recent weather, so you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, knowing that things could have changed.
So producers trying to play a little catch up if they can, not the easiest thing to do.
Right, absolutely.
What about cotton and rice?
So for cotton, we're looking at about 700,000 acres. This will be up about 80,000 acres over 2018 numbers. So quite a bit more cotton this year than last year. And for rice, 150,000 acres. This would be up about 10,000 acres from a year ago. Both of these numbers, again, weather impacts are real there too. There was certainly some replant that had to happen for both of those. But that's where we're sitting right now with the latest estimate.
Big picture, what does the report mean for Mississippi crop producers?
So I think it means a couple of things. Really less for cotton and rice and more for corn and soybeans. For corn, the message is pretty clear, even though it's uncertain. So it's pretty clear in that it drove prices down right after the report because the overall corn number was a lot bigger than people expected. For soybeans, the message is that we're probably going to see some opportunities to get rid of some of the beans that we had in storage from last year. I know we focus a lot on current crop, but we've also still got a lot of beans in storage from last year, and probably going to provide some opportunities with this weather uncertainty to clear out a lot of that bin space.
Back to the trivia quiz now as we wrap things up. Today's question was, who was the third member of the Apollo 11 crew 50 years ago? Was it A, Alan Shepard, B, Michael Collins, C, Deke Slayton, or D, Jim Lovell? Well, I'll give you a hint. He's still around. He's 88 now. He was born actually in Rome, Italy, and did some of his training right here in Columbus. Give up? The answer is B, Michael Collins. He said he wanted to help achieve John F. Kennedy's 1962 goal of landing on the moon within the decade. He never went back into space again. In this week's Farm Week feature, every job matters, especially in rural communities. The smaller the town, the more each paycheck counts. Today, in the conclusion of our series, Back to the Farm, the fourth part, a year ago, one family moved away from the city hoping for a comfortable life in rural Kansas. But things worked out differently than expected. Here's John Torpy.
As the Embry-Minders family approaches the one-year anniversary of their move to Burton, Kansas, Joni Embry-Minders is just beginning to feel settled in as the farm family faces tumultuous times. Low commodity prices, trade wars, and torrential rain have plagued rural Kansas farmers for several months. A longer-term problem facing Embry-Minders' hometown of Burton, Kansas, and many other small towns and farms across the country, is a dwindling population.
Let me ask my husband.
Upon their return, the Embry Minders family gained an up-close view of what population loss looked like in their community.
I don't get welcome home or welcome to Kansas or anything like that. What I get is, we are so glad you're here.
Metro population centers like Wichita witnessed growth of almost 15,000 residents between 2010 and 2018. In Harvey County, just outside of the Sunflower State's largest city, the population decreased almost 1.5%, losing nearly 500 people over the same time period. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Burton, Kansas has lost 6% of its population since 2000. Population gains that rural areas do experience are often offset by an advancing mortality rate and general migration away from smaller communities.
What's going to happen to all these farmsteads? Because people aren't moving out here. They're moving into town or leaving and not coming back. You know, what's going to happen to all this out here?
The exodus of rural populations has hurt communities in many ways. With fewer people spending money in town, fewer tax dollars come into community coffers. Rural businesses are already experiencing a customer shortage, which ends up hurting the bottom line and the future of small towns. When a farmer's equipment breaks down, they count on making timely repairs to get back in the field as soon as possible. Near the town of Mount Hope, Kansas, Howard's Incorporated has been helping farmers get back to work quickly for almost a century.
We try to take care of the smaller farmers and the needs of a big farmer. We don't sell any big machinery. We sell a lot of small machinery, and we have about anything to fix anyone up.
Howard prides himself on having parts on hand for countless models of farm machinery. He notes in the current economic times, farmers are trying to do more with less by keeping older equipment in good working order instead of buying something new. But for Howard, the number of customers visiting his store is declining.
But so many of our farmers are retiring and bigger farmers are taking them over. And we have less and less young farmers. I would love to find some young person with some ambition to buy it. Because my wife and I started this business with nothing. And we've worked all our lives, and I hate to see it disappear. And it's going to be tough on the farmers when we do disappear. But I have no idea what the future holds.
According to data from the University of Kansas, the number of people living in Burton peaked in the 1980s at 976. The population has been in steady decline ever since, hitting 874 in 2017.
So Burton is not unique in the declining population. It's a statistic across the country, and so I don't see it different than a lot of other towns where you're trying to sustain businesses, trying to recruit businesses, trying to sustain housing and roads and infrastructure. You try to run that balance of what improvements can you make, what improvements should you make, and in what order should those take place, because your tax base is small. And
shortly after being sworn in, Governor Laura Kelly, a Democrat, created the Office of Rural Prosperity. The group's mission is to take a deep dive into rural Kansas issues to see where the most help is needed.
We put this office together so that everything that we do, whether it's policy or budget, is filtered through the lens of our rural community. And we'll be focusing on all the issues. Hospital is one of them, but we'll also be looking at housing, education, telemedicine, and beyond.
There was a glimmer of hope for rural population growth in 2017. According to USDA data, an improved labor market, higher incomes, and an improving real estate market helped numerous counties stop a 6-year decline in population. However, an increase in retirements and migration to metro areas led to population growth only breaking even.
we really want to help local communities decide what is prosperity to them. Some, it might be opening a community center or a place for coffee. Others, it might be moving them on to the next step. You know, they've had a multiple year task of putting in housing and tourism and agribusiness. And so we want to work with local communities.
Lieutenant Governor Rogers will be leading a group from the Office of Rural Prosperity on a 12-city fact-finding journey across Kansas that begins in June and ends in late August. As for Joni and Zach, they have stopped working on the Young farm and have taken off-farm jobs. The couple hopes to set themselves up to eventually own their own operation. Until then, they continue to have their sights set on a future in farming that includes a pathway for their children.
And this, like Joni said before, it's really for the kids. So if that opportunity is what they want to be able to do, which Colby, that's his main focus. So if that's what they want to do, at least that opportunity is there for them when they get older.
Taking off-farm jobs, an all too common occurrence these days. As a matter of fact, the USDA estimates that 91% of farm households have at least one family member working off the farm. Well, next week, a story with a bit more upside. It's an unusual story, a nonprofit grocery store, a joint project between a small town in Cody, Nebraska and a school district. The students are the only paid employees and they get class credit. It doesn't get more rural than this. The bright spots are everywhere and this business model is sustainable in a people-centric way. That's next time on Farm Week. And before we let you go, these two young teens are new world record holders according to the Bow Fishing Association of America. They recently shot a channel catfish in South Dakota. This monster came in at 38.5 inches long and weighed in at 24 pounds and 12 ounces. Not bad for an afternoon's work. Remember, if you missed a story, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.